the army that got drunk and drowned. Itself, the Pyana River, 1377. They did not lose because the enemy was brilliant. They lost because they stopped acting like an army before the battle even began. This series is about battles lost to chaos moments when war turns ugly, not fiction, and human weakness hit first. And this story may be one of the most humiliating examples of all. An army waiting for the enemy, drinking by a river, and then collapsing so fast that many never even reached a real fight. In 1377, the Russian principalities were trying to hold back another threat from the Golden Horde. Forces from Nizhny Novgorod, Suzdal, and their allies gathered near the Pyana River, expecting a clash with the army of Arab Shah, known in Russian chronicles as Iraq Shah. Their task was simple on paper: prepare, hold position, and be ready to meet the attack. But war has a way of punishing the word later. The enemy did not seem close. Scouts and reports suggested there was still time. The weather was hot. The waiting dragged on, and slowly the dangerous thought entered the camp. Maybe not today. That is how collapses begin. Not with a trumpet, not with a charge, with a small surrender of standards. The men loosened up. Units drifted out of formation. Some wandered into nearby settlements. Weapons were not always kept close. Watches softened. Mead and beer began to flow. Discipline, that invisible thing holding an army together, started to rot in broad daylight. And that is the part modern people often misunderstand. Armies do not become useless only when they are beaten. Sometimes they become useless first, and then get beaten because of it. By the banks of the Pyana, the Russians were still a military force in theory. In reality, they were becoming a crowd. Tired, overconfident, unstructured, and increasingly drunk. The banners were still there. The commanders were still there. But the machine was already coming apart. Before we get to the strike itself, this is exactly why stories like this matter. Wars are not always lost in heroic final stands. Sometimes they are lost because people get sloppy before the real test arrives. And if you like these stories of military collapse, confusion, and battlefield disasters, subscribe, leave a like, and drop your next topic in the comments, because there is no shortage of moments in history where everything fell apart for brutally human reasons. Now, back to the river. Arab Shah did not need his enemy to be weak in courage. He only needed them weak in readiness. He had scouts, he had mobility, he had timing, and most importantly, he had an opponent doing half the work for him. When the attack finally came on August 2, it was sudden enough to hit men who had mentally already left the battlefield. That matters more than people think. Surprise is not just about position, it is about state of mind. A disciplined army under surprise can still grab weapons, find officers, form ranks, and start making decisions. A half-drunk camp does something else entirely. Men wake slowly. They mishear commands. They grab the wrong equipment. Some run toward shouting, others away from it. Nobody is sure where the danger actually is, and within moments, confusion begins doing more damage than the enemy. The first shock must have been unbelievable. Instead of organized resistance, the camp erupted into fragments. Some men tried to arm themselves. Others tried to flee immediately. Officers could not easily rebuild order out of men whose judgment had already been dulled. Once the first panic started, it spread with terrifying speed. That is one of the cruel laws of battlefield psychology. Panic moves faster than information. A calm order has to be heard, understood, believed, and obeyed. Panic needs none of that. One man runs, and the next assumes he knows something. A third hears screaming and decides the line is gone. A fourth sees horses breaking loose and thinks the enemy is already everywhere. In a matter of moments, the camp stops behaving like a chain of command and starts behaving like a stampede. Alcohol made every one of those reactions worse. it slowed judgment. It blurred attention. It inflated false confidence before the attack, then destroyed coordination once fear entered the camp. Men who might have stood firm while sober became slower, louder, less precise, and more vulnerable to suggestion. And suggestion is deadly in chaos. If enough people act like a disaster is happening, then a disaster is happening, whether the original threat was that large or not. At Pyana, the result was catastrophic. The Russian force could not form an effective defense. Many were cut down while trying to flee. Others rushed toward the river, perhaps believing escape across the water was still possible, perhaps simply following the movement of the crowd. But rivers are merciless when fear takes over. Men burdened with armor and weapons, disorganized and desperate, do not cross cleanly. They slip, they collide, they drag each other down. Prince Ivan Dmitrievich himself died in the collapse, along with many nobles and soldiers who were swallowed not by a proud battlefield death, but by confusion, water, and a retreat that became a rout before it had any shape at all. That image is what makes this story so savage. Not warriors standing firm under impossible odds. Not a glorious last stand. An army unraveling at the edge of a river, too disordered to fight properly, too panicked to escape properly, and too degraded to recover once the blow landed. And once that kind of collapse starts, it does not stay local. The defeat at the Pyana River opened the door for further devastation in the region. The loss was not only military, it was political and psychological. Lands behind the failed defense became exposed. Towns suffered. Confidence shattered. Enemies learned something valuable. This was not just a force that could be beaten. It was a force that could fall apart. That difference matters. A defeated army may regroup. A humiliated army carries rot in its memory. So, how does something like this happen? Not because every soldier was a fool, not because nobody cared, but because humans are terrible at holding tension for long periods without relief. Waiting is exhausting. Uncertainty is exhausting. In that kind of atmosphere, comfort starts to feel justified. One drink becomes a few. A loose posture becomes routine. Readiness becomes something people assume they can switch back on when needed. But war does not send a polite warning before it cashes the bill. By the time the men at Pyana realized the enemy had truly arrived, they were trying to rebuild discipline in the exact moment discipline was most needed. And that almost never works. Systems cannot be improvised under impact. They have to exist beforehand. That is the real lesson here. Command and control are not just battlefield tools. They are anti-chaos tools. Camp discipline is not ceremonial. It is what protects an army during the dangerous hours when nothing seems to be happening. Clear watches, enforced sobriety, weapon readiness, rapid assembly points, reliable scouting, and immediate trust in command. These are the things that stop a surprise attack from becoming a massacre. And there is another lesson, maybe the ugliest one of all. Armies often imagine their greatest test is the battle itself. But sometimes the real test is boredom, fatigue, delay, false confidence, the slow decay of seriousness. That is where disaster often starts, not in the clash, but in the waiting. At the Pyana River, the enemy did not create chaos from nothing. He found it already growing in the camp and struck at exactly the right moment. The battle was lost before the first blow landed because the discipline needed to survive that blow had already been traded away. That is why this story belongs in Battles Lost to Chaos, because this was not simply a defeat. It was a collapse of readiness, a collapse of judgment, and then a collapse of nerve. An army did not get outmaneuvered so much as it gave chaos a wide-open gate and then acted shocked when chaos came through it. And that is what makes the story linger. Not just the drinking, not just the drowning, but the brutal truth underneath it. Once order dies, everything else dies fast after it. This was another chapter in battles lost to chaos, where wars are not always lost to superior strategy, but to panic, disorder, and systems failing at the exact moment they are needed most.